Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, it has begun to rain as we practice together.
So it has. There is nowhere it doesn't reach.
Indeed, as it says in the sutras, all of us, all the children of the Buddha, are awash in his Dharma rain.
So we are. So too are those who are not children of the Buddha. Suffering, impermanence, emptiness, these all apply to them too.
Then that would mean they are on the path just like us. The Buddha's teaching is for them just as much as it is for us, even if we have read a few more sutras than they.
Indeed, though the Buddha would ask you, does that mean we know more than they do?
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. We have been making this show for nearly 2 years now, and we have recently surpassed 100 total uploads. So, we thought we would walk back to step 1 and revisit our first set of 3 questions and reflect on how we might answer these questions differently now that we've learned to discuss together for so long. So, this week we will be revisiting the same questions in episode 1 nearly 2 years ago. What is Buddhism? Why are we talking about it? Do all Buddhists believe the same things? We hope you enjoy. So, back to the first question. What is Buddhism?
In episode 1, we talked about how Buddhism is a religious tradition originating in India and Nepal 2,500 years ago with the life of Shakyamuni Buddha. We talked about how many self-identifying Buddhists there are today. We talked about the life of the Buddha, and we talked about the history of its spread from India and Nepal to China, Korea, Japan, and America. Now, I hope that you can see each of these points more vibrantly now that we've discussed many of them in so much more detail over the course of the show. If I were to answer this question now, I would first and foremost like to reflect on how the Western words that we use to talk about Buddhism and other Asian religions and philosophical traditions don't actually capture the whole picture. In the West, we have so many imaginations about religion as a concept that simply don't fit whenever they're applied to Buddhism. In the realm of imaginations of religion, I'm thinking of the many Judeo-Christian normative ideas of religion, like believing in a single, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent deity, or organizing into a church, or church-like communities, or picking a specific day of the week for worship, engaging in prayer, and many more. I hope you can see now that we've been discussing this stuff every Friday for a couple of years, that these ideas simply don't reflect the historical or present-day realities of Buddhism. In the realm of philosophy, people in the West have imaginations about it being secular, about it being mainly a matter of thought and argument instead of practice and ritual, and stuff like that. And I hope you can see that this does not fully reflect Buddhism either. Additionally, I hope that as I'm saying all of these things, you're immediately thinking of all the exceptions to all of the rules that we have talked about on the show. For example, esoteric Buddhism does have a deity which is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Similarly, there has been a Buddhist modernist movement over the last 150 years that has looked at Buddhism as being secular, philosophical, and even scientific.
Regarding the Buddhist modern movement, in my opinion, something being relatively new doesn't invalidate it, and a secular spin on a religious idea can still produce value and insight. There are people, cough me, cough, who would be completely unable to access said insight from a starting point of religion, faith, and ritual. Some of us need that secular starting point. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't think the modern Buddhist spin is that far separated from the liberties taken by Mahayana writers when those sutras were being written centuries after Shakyamuni Buddha's death. The religion has changed many times before, and it's going to change again in the following centuries. That's just impermanence at work. I do understand resistance to this mindset, though, and I understand the resistance to calling secular Buddhists. I have seen a lot of these secular Buddhists completely missing the point out there. That's why I would call myself Buddhish rather than Buddhist. Secular Buddhism is not the same, but it has similar notes, and it can be a useful entry point.
I agree completely. Additionally, I would like to mention the divide between textual and ritual traditions of Buddhism that we find in scholarship about it. scholars of Buddhism usually start with one of these two approaches in the study of Buddhism. Textual scholars look primarily or even exclusively at the sacred words which have been written down all throughout the history of Buddhism, and they have aimed to make sense of those texts in and among themselves. These types have tended to be called Buddhologists, and as important as they've gone out of style in the modern scholarly world because the discovery of new texts has slowed down considerably. Additionally, as many thousands of texts in dozens of languages as there are which can be studied in Buddhism, the texts are only a small part of the complete picture. The other approach in the scholarly world of Buddhism is to study ritual and practice, and only reach for texts when it's important for informing or constructing the ritual or practice one is looking at. This is much more in style because ritual and practice is so highly localized and often borrows from other traditions and other disciplines that exist around them, creating a very unique and fascinating window through which to see what Buddhists actually do or have done in the past or present. People who approach Buddhism from only one of these sides without looking over the fence at the other will understand Buddhism extremely differently than people who approach it differently. And I hope that our episodes where we read sutras and our episodes where we discuss and describe ritual have shown you the importance of carrying both approaches with you to the study of Buddhism. There is no way to get a complete picture of what is going on in Buddhism if you only look at one of those two sides. I also hope that as you're listening to this, you're also thinking about how those are not the only two routes available as an approach to the study of Buddhism. For example, I've recently begun specializing my research into sacred spaces in Buddhism. Sacred spaces are the places where ritual and text intersect. Yet they are also the place where art history, cultural history, architecture, geography, and so many other threads intersect. So I urge listeners who have been with us for a while to consider your own approach, but also to consider another approach so that you can see what you see if you come at it in an unfamiliar way. When you look at it from another angle, you're much more likely to see something that you haven't seen before.
Why are we talking about Buddhism?
In our first episode, we talked about how this is the 5th largest religion in the world by number of followers, and how our Western understanding of it is so heavily filtered through our European and colonial past. We also mentioned how it has been grabbed by the self-help New Age community to try and package and sell something to a gullible audience, and we mentioned how we wanted to offer a more historical, nuanced, and decolonized view of Buddhism for those who are on the internet looking for info about it. If I were to answer this question again now, I would stand by that first answer, but I would also add that another reason we're talking about it is that it's really freaking interesting. I know that I'm biased because I'm such a nerd for this stuff, but I have found everything I've studied about Buddhism to be very, very fascinating without fail. I think that some things are more interesting than others, but the truth is that the way I see it, the least interesting topic in Buddhism is still more interesting to me than the most interesting topic in the study of any other major religion or any other major discipline. Every rule has so many exceptions, and yet they still each all fit into the system as a whole. I think it's the most interesting thing in the world, and the reason why we're talking about it together is because we have such a strong interest in it, and we wanted to shed light on it for other people who might feel that way as well.
I agree with that sentiment completely. Outside the show, I've been trying my hand at game design. This includes world building and the writing aspect. An occasional Buddhist touch to my settings or my plots have made them more compelling and vibrant, as spoken by my players. I've gotten compliments on this stuff. The imagery and symbolism in the sutras and in Buddhist art is just a gold mine for ideas. I'd also say that many of the things the Buddha observed and spoke about in the real world has merit. The ideas of dukkha, impermanence, non-attachment, and the middle way resonate outside of their religious context, which is one of the reasons why secular Buddhism is taking off. There are notes within that apply in secular thinking as well. And the idea of desire as a hindrance to overcome, of greed to be something to put aside, that has helped me personally be a lot less stressed and dissatisfied. So, next question. Do all Buddhists believe the same things?
In our first episode, we discussed some of the most prevalent doctrines that are shared among Buddhists in the world, including the 3 Dharma seals, the 4 Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path. I think that if somebody looks at Buddhism, even in a cursory fashion, they should come away with those 3 things at a minimum. Those are so fundamental to the development of all the other super specific and interesting things we talk about. Everything that we have discussed relates with and/or responds to those in some way. I think they represent the fundamental contribution that Buddhism makes to the world of religious thought. However, as important as they are, I hope that you've seen that the answer to this question is a resounding no. They do not all believe the same things. There are as many Buddhist belief systems as there are Buddhists in the world, both in the past and the present. Every single sect, school, or division of Buddhism interprets the 3 Dharma seals, the 4 Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path in some interesting and unique way for their own purposes. They will even go so far as to question, reimagine, and redefine each of those for their own purposes, such that they don't even look like the same doctrines whenever they're held up to the original ones. We had to start somewhere, and so I thought it best to start essentially where the Buddha himself started, as those 3 things are the content of his first sermon. But you can see that those things are addition, and there is multiplication, division, trigonometry, calculus, differential equations, and much more out there in the world of Buddhism. Therefore, if I were to answer this question now, I would just say no and move on.
The differences between Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana Buddhism are so stark that I sometimes question if we should even consider them the same religion. For what it's worth, I asked the same question of Catholic and Protestant Christians, and I suspect any other religion that I looked at, I would find these dividing lines, borders where one is not sure if it's the same religion anymore. The thing is, Buddhism already answers that concern with the idea of non-duality. Trying to make that distinction is already an error in and of itself. So, anyway, the answer to the original question is a capital no.
We hope you enjoyed our revisit of episode 1. We would like to thank you all very much for listening with us for nearly 2 years and 100 episodes now, and we hope that you'll continue to ask us questions and join us as we discuss them together. Join us next time, where we will discuss the 5 hindrances. What are the 5 hindrances? How does one overcome them? How have understandings of them changed over time? We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, both now and for our previous 100 episodes. Here's to 100 more.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of Hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.